Good evening. I am Cynthia Elliott, President of the Rochester Board of Education, along with my colleagues. We are hosting a work session on school violence. The reason why it was important for us to do this work session where we have many stakeholders involved has to do with what I begin to see is a lot of parents coming into the schools also causing violence, not only with the students who are causing violence, but started to see parents come in, starting to go past security guards, really starting to fight other students and encouraging their children to fight. And so it got to this level where I said, well, enough is enough. We're going to have to come together to determine what we can do as a community to avoid these kinds of issues that we are facing in our schools. As a result of this kind of violence, we have students who don't want to come to school or who are experiencing violence. We're having students who are going just into the classrooms to fight someone. How disruptive that is to our classrooms. And it's not the kind of fight, it's a lot of anger that our students seem to have who are causing, who are engaged in this kind of behavior. So you have students who want to be in our classes and learning, but are traumatized by what they're seeing in the classrooms, what they're seeing in the hallways. I don't know the answer to that. I know that a lot of what we are suffering from has to do with COVID and has to do with us being on lockdown for a couple of years. But how do we move from that kind of experience and move into an area where we can get back on track and where we can have every student who's in our district to learn? School is not a place for violence. No place is a place for violence, for that matter, but certainly school is not a place for violence. Many of our personnel, many of our staff are not equipped to do the kind of, to participate and try to protect our students from which seems to be an exorbitant amount of violence. The district does not have the capacity for that. And furthermore, why should we spend money on SSOs when we could spend money on academic materials and things that are going to increase academic performance, as opposed to spending money on SSOs and other kinds of things. And there is the alternative to spending on social and emotional learning and some things like that. And so I'm interested in hearing from all of our stakeholders, what are some of the alternatives to even having, increase of social, security guards, because that is, frankly, that is not the answer. Doing it that way. We are having a lot of people in our district who are just retiring or resigning that don't want to deal with it. And we're having parents whose children want to learn leaving our school district. We cannot continue that kind of hemorrhaging based on the fact that nobody wants to be in our school district because there is a significant amount of violence in our schools. And so we have to address this issue, and we have to address this issue as a community. Now, this is the first session that we're having. And let me just also mention, and I know that Vice President LeBron would talk a little bit more about it. We had the community to do a great code of conduct. And so there is going to be a group that's going to revisit the code of conduct. That was one of the best community engagement projects in my tenure of being on the board, and it was very successful. And so we're going to be revisiting that. But parents and others, we've got to do better with our children, those who are causing the kinds of issues in our community. So having said that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to allow some of the commissioners, if they have some words to say at this point, to share their thoughts. But this body, this board, wants to address the issue of violence within our schools. And so this is an opportunity that we're looking to begin the conversation. And I'm looking forward to the participation, the ideas that our stakeholders will have in this regard. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to start with our board, my board colleagues, and I'll start with Commissioner Patterson for his remarks about this topic. Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Good evening, all our listeners, be it parents, be it other administrators, teachers, staff, Superintendent Dr. Jello, and anyone else who might be listening. Also, if anyone wants to reach me after this meeting, I apologize. I have an event planned this evening, was already planned, and I'm not available after I speak, but you can reach me at james.patterson@rsdk12.org. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and read something that I prepared. A sense of urgency. We're not listening with the ears of our heart. Someone mentioned that in the meeting at the mayor's budget meeting, or Rochester City budget meeting. So I wanted to repeat that. It sounded really nice. We're not listening with the ears of our heart. Each school day, our nation's schools are entrusted to provide a safe and healthy learning environment for approximately 55 million K-12 students in the public and non-public schools. Families and communities expect schools to keep their children and youth safe from threats and hazards. In collaboration with their local government and community partners, schools can take steps to plan for these potential emergencies through the creation of a school emergency operations plan, which I know we have. Lessons learned from school emergencies and school shootings highlight the importance of preparing school officials and first responders to implement emergency operations plans. By having plans in place to keep students and staff safe, schools play a key role in taking preventive and protective measures to stop an emergency from occurring or reducing the impact of an incident. They also work with the community partners, i.e. governmental organizations that have a responsibility in the school emergency operations plan to provide cohesive, coordinated response. Families and communities expect schools to keep their children and youth safe. So preparedness, it's defined around 5 mission areas: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. Prevention, breaking them down, means the capabilities necessary to avoid, deter, or stop an imminent crime or threaten or actual mass casualty incident. Protection, it focuses on ongoing actions that protect students, teachers, staff, visitors, networks, and property from the threat or hazard. Mitigation refers to the capabilities necessary to eliminate or reduce the impact or an event, loss, or emergency, reducing the likelihood that threats and hazards will occur. Response refers to the capabilities necessary to stabilize an emergency, establish a safe and secure environment, save lives and property, and facilitate the transition to recovery. Recovery refers to restoring the learning environment after a mass casualty and or serious incident by engaging and collaborating with emergency management officials and emergency responders. Having an existing plan, revising and adapting that plan in alignment with the terminology and approaches used across the nation are critical. Question: are we as a district in direct violation of New York State Schools Against Violence in Education, SAVE, legislation or statute and regulation requiring coordination and communication between school staff, law enforcement, and other first responders? So I ask my board colleagues, the superintendent and her administration, when it comes to our school safety and violence, reports of weapons being confiscated from students while entering a school building, does this not warrant you all a sense of urgency? Parents forcibly entering, as the president said, Parents forcibly entering our schools, passing off weapons and or dangerous instruments to their children, student disruptions, the use of profanity, belligerent and disrespectful behaviors, and increase in student disciplinary hearings. Does this not present a sense of urgency? My personal advocacy in the area of school safety, request for a dialogue to take place amongst my colleagues regarding school safety, and the statistical data, do these results not warrant a sense of urgency? My personal request for a student survey, not parent, but a student survey be performed, and student requests for return of SROs to our schools that pose a threat to others' safety. Is there not a sense of urgency? With the recent elementary school shootings in Texas that resulted in multiple deaths of children and others, and the most recent shooting in Buffalo, New York, my hometown, where the shooter's manifesto included attacks on our city, is there no sense of urgency? Shootings, bullying, harassment, and assaults on people of color are on the rise nationally. Is there no sense of urgency? With regard to our best and brightest students departing our public schools to urban, suburban programs and charter schools, is there presently no sense of urgency? As our teachers unexpectedly leave the district due to feeling unsupported and are reaching out for our help and relief, is there no sense of urgency to rectify this? Rebuilding and restoring relationships between our partners, unions, teachers, administrators, and law enforcement officials, is there no sense of urgency? With a district school modernization program, this is very important. Law enforcement will no longer have prior knowledge of schools' infrastructure, therefore slowing down entry of our facilities and engagement of the perpetrator or perpetrators. Where is the sense of urgency? We must acknowledge the amount of violence occurring within our school district. We must hold each school accountable to ensure accurate reporting. We must begin to rebuild and restore relationships. We must do better. Keyword we. In closing, I am requesting administration provide us with a bi-weekly report on school-to-school violence. Why the sense of urgency? Because if we don't get this right, someone's child might die. Every life is worth saving. It could be your child or it could be mine. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Commissioner Simmons, any remarks from you?
Thank you, President Elliott. I'm excited to be here this evening because I think the demonstrated number of people on this call is showing the sense of urgency that we have around this issue. And I know that the school district has done extensive research and surveying of students, parents, families, administrator on what that could look like. Like Commissioner Patterson did say, I do believe that we need to have an increased pulse on what's going on in the climate of the schools currently, and make sure that we're triaging plans that are preventative and proactive. And when I think of school safety, I consider emotional and mental safety as well as physical safety, and making sure that we have a plan in place. So I'm going to not prolong the discussion because I think we have a lot of folks that demonstrate expertise in safety, a lot of folks that are in the actual school buildings, students and parents. I see a lot of faces that are very familiar to me from this community. So I want to digress and allow those voices to be heard to help inform my understanding of what they believe is additionally needed. Respectfully, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. Commissioner Adams.
Yes, so first of all, let me take a quick moment of silence for Daniel Proulx. We seem to forget a lot of things. It was only just 2 years ago in the beginning, as soon as I got in office, that we had all kinds of studies and surveys, and we had people, they had a state trooper come in and do a presentation, probably one of the worst presentations I ever seen in my life. It was ridiculous. But in the end, we had a big meeting at Monroe High School. We talked with the students. The students came and presented to the board almost every week. So to cherry pick as if we're not with the pulse of the district is just not the truth. And I'm looking at these suspension numbers today, where we don't have SROs in the school now, and the numbers are down. The suspension numbers are down with the things that are posted. And to insinuate that our security might not have an emergency of a plan in place is really offensive. I'm not buying that. And then don't cherry pick the Texas thing, because we're questioning now whether or not the police caused the situation to be worse. So let's don't bring a situation up and cherry pick some information out of it. And with that, I got kids in this district. I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I have a 29-year-old that graduated from this district. And I have the same response from all of them. And y'all know what that is. That's they don't need SROs to resolve issues. And also, it was mentioned earlier about parents coming in cutting up. I need to say that some parents have actually been reaching out, and as a result of not getting no responses, have cut up. So we have to look at these whole pictures. And so and with that, I'm just gonna let it go. I ain't gonna tuck you out of death, but I feel very strongly about this.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner LeBron, Vice President LeBron.
Give me one quick second. I actually have to change my settings here, President Elliott. Can you go to someone else and call on me next, please?
Commissioner Powell.
Sure. Look, I don't have any prepared remarks. My mission here is to hear what there is to hear. And we've kind of heard from two board members, ostensibly from two opposite ends of the debate. What I really want is to see and hear the data on all sides. I do want to hear what the students are feeling now that our SROs are not in the building. That isn't to say that I think we should have the SROs back. It may be that the data shows that they should be in some of our schools, but don't have to be in all of our schools, high schools. I want us to seriously be data driven and not come into the conversation with our minds closed. So that's all I have to say. And I look forward to what information might be presented tonight.
Thank you. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate this evening. You know, I too have a sense of urgency, but I'm the first to admit that I am not a safety expert. I work in a school. I do all the drills, but at my school, I don't have any cops in my school, and I feel like my students are quite safe. I think that students, of course, are our priority, and we always have to think of them. That has to drive every decision that we make. And every student deserves a safe environment in which to learn and grow. And so I don't have all the answers, but collectively as a community, I think we do have answers. And these conversations are going to be really critical as we work together to address violence in school. What I can say is that in that sense of urgency, I want to ensure that we do not increase police presence on our campuses. I voted to rid our campuses of SROs almost 3 years ago, and I stand by that decision. I feel that our students need more counselors, not cops in our buildings, and restorative practice is what kids culturally need. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Vice President LeBron.
Thank you, and I apologize. I'm transitioning back from an appointment, so I'm going to just keep it very brief as I can. 2019-20 resolution number 1025 is the resolution that the board voted to remove the SROs. And I just want to be clear, I 100% will never support police officers in schools to insinuate that, yes, the police won't know the infrastructure. That is the prison, school to prison pipeline that Commissioner Patterson is trying to rebuke out of his mouth. I am not interested in giving police officers any personal information about students prior to them ever engaging them. And I'm not interested in uplifting the school to prison pipeline. And when we talk about data, Rochester has to stop looking at just the data here. This is a much larger national issue, and we are part of that issue if we do not act and keep police officers out. I absolutely want to support more supports in our schools. Is that just social workers and counselors? No, because our current infrastructure for that does not also allow them to do their best work for students because we don't have enough of them. But even if we did have enough of them, that is another systemic issue that needs to be addressed. Are there other community partners and organizations and boots on the ground that do this work and we need to be better partners with? Absolutely. And that is what I'm interested in supporting. But I do want to highlight something and acknowledge that this did not happen. And so we voted in 2020 on this resolution, and then COVID happened. And so police officers were removed, and we had a transition of a superintendent during that time. We also came back to schools with we do have safety plans for other schools, whether they're fully funded and equipped adequately, they're not, and that's another conversation that we need to have. But I just want to point out that in this resolution, it is resolved that the RCSD approves that their removal of school resource officers and declining to enter into any new intermunicipal agreement with the city of Rochester for school resource officers. I don't know what law Patterson was citing around New York State law requiring us to have engagement or agreement with them, but our lawyers would never allow us to pass a resolution that is illegal and not scope and review other laws. So I just want to put that on record. The other piece, though, it is that it required the superintendent, and there was a different superintendent. And I don't know if our current superintendent has ever read this, but it says that it will provide recommendations on how school safety staffing and procedures will be adapted with the termination of SROs. And I've never seen that adaptation plan, and I want to be clear about that. Because part of the conversations that we would have more school safety officers, our sentries, our security officers, and trained in restorative practices. And the person that was training them was put in a different position altogether. So that person, unfortunately, no longer runs that training. And so I would be interested in bringing that back to the district. And as you mentioned, President Elliott, the code of conduct was an extensive community, parent, student-driven effort that gave us the code of conduct. And this actually ties that code of conduct back in there, and that it is applied rigorously throughout our school communities. And we have not seen that. So I do want to acknowledge those things. And there is a sense of urgency on everything. Everything is a sense of urgency. I know for myself and you all, I know I can speak for at least 4 commissioners, but I do want to add that with the code of conduct, that original group that started that is going to be educating the superintendent and her administration. And we're going to be looking at how we move forward with implementing the code of conduct, providing training for all staff, and moving forward with fidelity. Thank you.
President
Elliott. Thank you, Vice President LeBron. So what I want to do next is to introduce our participants. I'm so excited about the different diverse stakeholders that we have to discuss this issue. And I'm excited about what we can come away with our stakeholders. So I'm going to start to introduce our students. Anaya Simmons, she's our student board representative. Daryl Fields, Marquand Johnson, Tommy Johnson, Marquand Grimes, Isaiah Santiago, and all of these are students that I'm introducing. David Bunyan, Destiny Pizarro, and the last 4, excuse me, are also with Teen Empowerment. Destiny Pizarro, Miles Moses, Shania Ruth, and Heaven Vega. And I want to welcome all of our students. I'm looking forward to hearing your input to this issue. The next group of stakeholders is our parents. Rebecca Hetherington, she's a parent and board representative. I believe she represents on our finance committee. Cherie Granderson, a member of the Parent Leadership Advisory Council. Billy Jones, who's also a member of that council. Shannon Cooper, Mary Adams, who's also a part of the council. Nakari Sanchez, who's a part of the Parent Bilingual Council. Divith Garcia, who's a part of the Bilingual Council. Yohani Alden and Zula Maqueda Alba, both of them are part of the Bilingual Parent Council. The next group of stakeholders is our teachers. Josh Mack at Northwest Junior High School, Lisa McClary, social worker in Pathways to Peace, Tabitha Woody, Leadership Academy, Denise Greenaway, School of Five, Christopher Fields, East High School, Janita Dixon, School 52, and Leslie Johnson, School 5. Next group of stakeholders is our principals, Stephanie Harris, Franklin Lower School, Rodney Moore, Northwest, Jacob Scott, Edison, Stephen Humphrey, Edison Assistant Principal, Corey Hepburn, School 2, Susan Ladd, number 39, and Nakia Burrows, Northeast. Those are our principals, and I want to welcome you as well. Administrators, we have Dr. Carmine Peluso, Demario Strickland. Both of them are chiefs. We have Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Kathy Black. We have Shani Keelan. She's the Chief Academics and Curriculum Officer. We have Tony Jordan and Sheldon Cox. Our Office of Safety and Security stakeholders, and again, welcome our administrators and our principals. James Shepard, Safety and Security. Chuck Cutler, Safety and Security. Danny Benacourt, Safety and Security. Maria Estevez, an SSO. Sandra Beasley, an SSO. Diego Ortiz, Joe Jackson, and Derek Blue. They're all SSOs, and I want to welcome our security officers who are there on the front lines. And members of our community include Wanda Ridgway, Rise Up Rochester, Freddie Hines, also Rise Up Rochester, Shantara Randall, Teen Empowerment, George Warren, My Brother's Keeper, City of Rochester, Maurice Haskins, My Brother's Keeper, the Rochester City School District, Renee Joyner, Willie Robinson, Van White, Curtis Joyner, City of Rochester, and Rosemary Rivera, Citizen Action. And just want to welcome, I'm telling you, I'm really excited about those who are participating in this great effort. And thank you. And so the next on the agenda is that we'll hear a message from Superintendent Lesli Myers-Small regarding transitioning from middle school, that whole model, because we know that a lot of the violence occurs with those students who are in that middle school group. And so I'm interested in hearing from the superintendent with regard to the social supports for the schools that have a number of our middle school students that tend to, because they're moving through puberty, they're learning who they are, they're no longer children, they're moving into adulthood. And one of the things that I've learned is that with that group, we've got to give a lot of love and a lot of praise. And if that's not a part of, our design, then we're missing enabling them to be successful transitioning to high school. Dr. Lesli Myers-Small.
Thank you, President Elliott. Good evening to you, Vice President LeBron, our commissioners, and all of our guests, both within the district and those who support us outside of the district. I'm just briefly going to talk about the transition from middle school to high school. We know that middle school is certainly a vital time for students' social emotional development. As students are developing to understand themselves, it's often difficult for them to understand and interact with others. Students also need positive interactions with not only their peers, but also adults in their school lives. Many students just simply don't understand where they fit in society. So middle school years are critical for everything from developing personality traits, curiosity, and study habits to making decisions about a future, a bright future after high school. So as we talk about transitioning from middle school, we know entering ninth grade can be very emotionally difficult, and it certainly can be very academically challenging if you'll go to the next slide in scholars' lives, along with self-esteem issues, developmental changes, and environmental shakeup faced by young adolescents. School districts risk watching their ninth graders fall through the cracks without proper transitional programs in place. In fact, researchers have identified ninth grade as the most critical point to intervene and prevent students from losing motivation, failing, and dropping out of school. Some school districts across the country are finding the best way to address this need by creating ninth grade academies, centers, or schools within schools. These rather new entities are designed to smooth the transition to high school and give students the attention they need during this critical time. So let's talk about what we are piloting in the 22-23 school year. We're calling it our transitioning from middle school model. And right now we have pilots that will occur at Edison Career and Technology High School, Northeast College Prep, which will be located at Charlotte, and Franklin Upper. So what does that transitioning from middle school model exactly look like? Certainly, it's assigning first and foremost dedicated staff, including teachers, administrators, counselors, and social workers, to work with the unique needs that these incoming ninth graders have and are coming to their campuses. Additionally, designating areas in buildings for a community feel. As I've been in some of our secondary schools and I've talked with staff, spoken with teachers and administrators, I often hear the importance of having just areas where ninth graders are just together and not with upperclassmen, so that they can build community, that they can work together, and that they can learn together. Additionally, the importance of strategically building master schedules where students can be in cohorts and learn together. There's a lot of research out there that speaks to the importance of having scholars learn together in groups or pods in their core courses, and even participating in some of the extracurricular or specials. When some students go off to college, there's often a bridge program to go from high school to college to help make that transition smooth. Well, we're looking at a similar process to transition students from middle school to high school to make that transition more easy for them, not only academically, but social emotionally as well. So summer bridge or boot camp, so scholars can meet the staff ahead of time. They can get acclimated with their peers. They can get acclimated to their new school building, and really become accustomed to what it's like to be a high school student. And then finally, consistent check-ins, town halls regarding grades and credits, each marking period with counselors to ensure that they are on track and are to also do graduation planning. We know that the research is very compelling, and it says very emphatically that if scholars can earn at least 5.5 credits, the likelihood that they are going to be successful, graduate not only from high school, but go on to college, that likelihood increases. So we know that it is critically important that we support our scholars in middle school, and especially as we think about what has happened and what's occurred in our district specifically as it relates to just continuing to move through the pandemic. So we are looking forward to launching these pilots and continuing to refine and to refocus so that we can have transitioning from middle school models exist for all of our scholars who are leaving 8th grade and moving into 9th grade into the world of high school. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I want to also recognize, I didn't have him on the list, Victor Saunders, the mayor's advisor on violence prevention programs. And I certainly need to highlight Victor Saunders. Victor's been doing this work forever, if you will, and is a subject matter expert for real on this topic and how we can go from, being punitive to being preventive. And so I welcome Victor Saunders with us. And so the next phase is to discuss, what is the problem? And some of us talked about what we see as the problems from our well, we didn't. We just sort of highlighted some. I highlighted some incidents that occurred. So I really didn't discuss problems. And so that's where this group is going to help us to discuss what those problems are. What I mentioned were the symptoms of what is going on. And so I'm looking forward to our stakeholders telling us what those problems are. Now, prior to that, what we're going to do is to have Chief of Schools, Demario Strickland, and Dr. Carmine Peluso to talk to us about, what is it that we're want to accomplish. We want to have a school district that is peaceful, where you can learn, where this school district is a beacon of hope. More times than I'd like to admit, the story in the news is about the violence that goes on in our district. And so how do we, avert that? And what are the goals that we want to try to accomplish with this whole effort? And I'm looking forward to hearing from our stakeholders. But first, we'll listen to Mr. Strickland and Dr. Peluso with regard to what the data shows around this issue of violence. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Strickland and Dr. Peluso.
Good evening, President Elliott and fellow board commissioners and overall greater Rochester community. We bring you greetings from the Office of the School Chiefs. And if Ms. Wade, can you put up perfect. That was a good segue into this portion of the presentation. We always like to ground ourselves in what are our goals that we hope to discuss in this process. Ms. Wade, next slide. So the biggest thing, and this really hits on what Commissioner Simmons really talked about, was making sure that students, faculty, and staff are mentally and physically safe. It's not just about the physical, but it's also about that psychological safety. We also want to make sure all environments are conducive to positive student outcomes. That's the overall goal, is to get our students from that cradle to career. We also, as chiefs, are now taking a deeper dive looking in to ensure that there's no disproportionate outcomes in referrals and suspensions, meaning we hope to show equity in this process on behalf of our student stakeholders. And we want to ensure that families communicate, are able to communicate effectively. And that's really centered around we want to assume best intent. Families want the best for their children. And when those needs get met, that's when we feel that some of these outcomes come about. So next slide, Ms. Wade. It is important to understand the systems and metrics that our New York State Education Department looks at in terms of what incidences are in our schools. And as you can see the bullets, we have everything from alcohol use, possession, and sale, all the way to weapons and weapon possession. Now, within all of these bullet points, all of these different types of occurrences don't necessarily mark a school unsafe. You know, I just we wanted to put that out there. And these are all coded under the school safety and education incident occurrences. Now, if, as you can see, there are some extreme situations that are bulleted. For instance, well, I mean, I wish we could say bomb threat was one of them, but we unfortunately have started to get some of those within our world and our school communities. But one, for instance, is homicide. Now, most of these offenses in these bullet points are actually not committed in the RCSD. And that's very, very important to note. But there are, the one that is most prevalent in our data is the drug use and possession. That's the highest noted offenses that are reported to NICED from RCSD. Now, we had some data that was actually inputted into board docs, which is where we house our information and our data for this presentation. And it is very important to understand that we cannot actually compare some apples we can't compare years, because New York State between the years of 2018 and 2022 has changed reporting mechanisms and actual coding for some of these occurrences. If you do go into the board docs, you will see that there is a glossary of terms inside of this PowerPoint presentation where New York State actually defines what certain incidences are that they actually recognize and are really reportable for you all. And with that being said, we have Dr. Peluso with a data overview, a high-level data overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Strickland, and thank you all, President Elliott, board commissioners, for hosting this important conversation and this important work. Today, what I'm going to do, and what Chief Strickland and I have done, is just kind of disaggregated some of this data at a high level to begin the conversation and start to look at what the numbers are telling us. In reminding ourselves that 2018-19 in this data was really our first and only, in this portion of the data, full year of schooling. So in 2018-19, you saw a total enrollment of roughly 25,669. And then we had 3,157 suspended students for about a 12.3% suspension rate. Breaking that down a little bit further, you'll start to see, if you did that per month, 10 months in that school year, and you ended up about 316 students suspended per month, 180 days in the school year approximately, and you ended up with about 18 student suspensions a day across the district. In 1920, that was the year that we had to transition out of our schools due to COVID on March 13th, I believe the date was. And at that point, we had 25,017 students enrolled. We had 2,765 students, suspended students, for an 11.1% suspension rate. If you break that down a little bit further to a per month rate, you'll see that that's about 425 suspensions per month. So that 1920, if you go across 6.5 months, you split March in half when we went to closure, it was about 115 days and about 24 students per day that were suspended. So just to kind of disaggregate that data a little bit further because of the closure. The 2021 data really was a hybrid year when we transitioned back to in-person, but with probably about 2/3 of our students remaining remote, the data remained hard to really measure and hard to really compare and use for comparison's sake at this point. In 21-22, where we are now, this data is compiled up to the January 28th, so the first half of the year. And currently, we were showing 22,260 students. Number of students suspended, 2,171 for a 9.8% suspension rate. If you break that down even further, again, if you go to a per month ratio, that's about 434 students suspended per month. And once again, approximately, if you use 90 days for the half year mark, you're about 24 per day. So very similar to the 2019, 2020 data as of when we ended this collection, and we will continue to see what it says over the next year for the remainder of the year. Kalia, next slide. Thank you. This right here data is just a breakdown by grade, and I think we've kind of talked a little bit about this, and the superintendent has hit on this, as well as Chief Strickland. You'll see our suspension rates in our K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are minimal, under 4%, K1, 2, very low, and then 3, 4, 5 rising a little bit. And if we go to our 6, 7, 8 slide next. Next slide, Kyle. This is where we start to see the increase of our suspension rates, right? And so our 6th grade remains lower, and then our 7th grade and 8th grade ends up being at 22% and 23.8% for this year, right? So we're saying 1,735 students in 7th grade enrolled, with 384 students suspended for 22%, and then 8th grade 1812 for 431 students, 23.8%. Once again, I don't think any of us are surprised by the number being higher in our 7th and 8th grade than what we see. And then if we go to 912. We see, once again, our 9th grade being high. Talking about what the superintendent talked about earlier today about the transitions and the supports necessary for 9th grade, but you also see the number of total enrollment for 9th grade is higher, because in order to transition to 10th grade, you'll have the students that roll to 9th grade and begin their 9th grade, first-time 9th graders, along with anyone that did not meet 6 credits to move to 10th grade, 5.5 or more credits, 6 credits to move to 10th grade, remain as 9th graders. So that's where you see an increase, as well as in 9th grade, for both students that are struggling academically as well as behaviorally, and they're at 21% in 9th grade. And then once again, we start to see the decline in suspension rate in 10th grade, of 15.2, with 271 students suspended. 11th grade, 146 students suspended for 11%. And then in 12th grade, when they're seniors, we have 68 students suspended for 5.6%. So those are what the numbers show in terms of rates. But then when we start to disaggregate that a little bit further, I'm going to turn this back over to Chief Strickland, who's going to kind of tell you what else we found from the numbers.
Thank you, Chief Peluso. So just some notable highlights within the discipline events and synopsis. We noticed, obviously, we've had one of our highest numbers is in fact fighting. We have some situations where there's an attack on students, which actually means someone went up to another student, hit or attacked or what have you, but it's not necessarily considered fighting. I do know that many school districts actually have a difficult time disseminating between what truly is fighting and what truly is an attack on another individual. Something that's a little pervasive, disruptive and disrespectful behaviors combined are 28% of the discipline events, which does not necessarily mean that these are actual suspensions. Once again, we're just coding them events. Some of them do, in fact, then turn into suspensions. We have about 6.4% in terms of insubordination, 3.9% with physical contact with school personnel, and 6.2% for class cutting and skipping. And as Chief Peluso already alluded to, our 7th through 9th grade, but along with our 10th graders, do make up the majority of our referrals that are in our system. Next slide, please. So I know President Elliott is doing a great job leading this discussion, and we just wanted to come and sort of throw out some of the things that we need to truly focus on as a community. And I'll actually read these bullet points. So for instance, how do we begin to address the following? Incidences that happen off campus or outside of the school's four walls, okay? We are having a large influx of social media issues that are among students and families that are actually coming into our buildings. There's an increased group and friend affiliation. I try not to continue to criminalize our students by saying gang, but students are hanging out with other individuals that they're connecting with and not necessarily making the right choices. And we need to figure out why they are choosing to do that versus, you know, the best things to do, which would likely lead to their best outcomes. Familial involvement in altercations with students. That has been the most alarming thing this year, and something to highlight. So when we came back to school from our COVID break, we really didn't start catching on that there was a lot of now families sort of getting involved in these altercations in our school communities. And we do need to figure out how do we begin now capturing that information. And that's going to be very important to do this, but we want to make something clear. We don't want students to necessarily be responsible for what other individuals are doing on their behalf if they did not tell them sort of to come and do this or what have you. Because at times we can't blame our students for what an adult may do, and we need to really keep that in mind and keep that to heart. And then how do we provide targeted support to our 7th through 10th grade students in particular? Of course, everyone needs us, but the data shows that this group, this age group, is really in need of the love and support from our community. Next slide. And then some next steps in our camp, Office of School Chiefs, some executive cabinet. We really want to consider one reporting mechanism for our behavior events for next school year. We definitely, because of the increase in disrespectful behavior, defiance, so on and so forth, we have to really focus on culturally responsive pedagogy and implicit bias for our staff members. We need to find arenas to engage families and caregivers positively in this work. Continue to diversify our faculty and staff. Students need to connect and form relationships with those individuals that do look like them. Continuous code of conduct trainings for students, families, and caregivers, letting them know what their rights are first and foremost, but what are the expectations for conduct and behavior in our school buildings. Continuous engagement of our amazing rock restorative team. We should really see something like that in every school building where we publicize these restorative circles and really engage our students that way, because that is going to sort of cut down that school to prison pipeline, which we know exists in our school community. And last but not least, just providing a circle time within our schedules where teachers can engage our students with their social emotional needs each day, so that we in all hopefully can just curb these incidences. And we know that if this happens, if students are mentally and physically safe, we will have positive outcomes for all the students in the Rochester City School Districts. And with that being said, thank you.
Thank you to Chief Strickland as well as Chief Peluso. Great information. Now I know that Rosemary Rivera had a couple of questions. Can you, Chiefs, respond to the questions that she had in the chat before I open it up to our commissioners. Let me see if I can.
Yes, Ms. Rivera. The data did have East High School listed within our sets. Am I right, Dr. Peluso?
Yes, it's inclusive of East, and it is inclusive of in-school suspensions from the data that we used for this presentation.
There was another question she had as well. Let me see if I can pull that up.
So, Ms. Rivera, that is a great question. And as you know, I pointed out that we need to be able to talk about the disproportionate outcomes or the disproportionate data that may exist. And I will say for the data set that myself and Dr. Peluso went through, it did not break it down by gender. It did not break it down by race, ethnicity. So that is an area we're going to have to continue to focus on. I know that you know that work is very, very important. So thank you for your questions, and we definitely would love to connect with you if you have any more thoughts and ideas that we possibly already thought of. But it would be great to hear what else you would be interested in. Thank you.
Thank you,
Absolutely,
Chief Strickland. So I'm going to open it up. I know on the agenda we have, discussion and comments from our board commissioners, but if there are any questions from any of the stakeholder groups, I'd like for you to raise your hand. And Callie, I'm going to ask you to call on them because I can't see the screen. But if any of our stakeholders have any questions to the chiefs or even to the superintendent about the work around the middle school model, please ask those questions now.
Okay, folks, if you can use the raise your hand tool on the Zoom, that will be helpful. Or if you just wave, that will be helpful as well. Okay, we have our first person is Rosemary Rivera from Citizen Action.
Hi, Rosemary. I just want to welcome you. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the work that you did on the Code of Conduct. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you. Actually, I really appreciate the data because I haven't seen data in such a long time. So I appreciate the work on the data. It's really important to be data driven in order to look at things. And to come up with real solutions and not just think of data like how do we put a pretty face on it, but to actually create some solutions on it. One of the things that I think the start of this conversation was a little confusing to me, and I would like some clarity because James Patterson started talking about an emergency response plan, and I think it was confusing to me who worked on the Code of Conduct. I think those are two different documents. One is the Code of Conduct, one is the emergency response plan, which the district does have. That's a crisis management document in my understanding, and it is absolutely required by the state. But I would say to the commissioners, don't worry, you are in compliance. You do have one. I just looked it up. So I was like, wait a minute, do we not have one? What the heck? We do have one. It is on the website. At the end of the day, in my opinion, in terms of stemming the violence in our community, the police really have not been able to resolve crime. And in terms of the 7th through 9th grades, I agree. This is an area that needs more resources and more attention. It has been that way for a long time. I feel like that's where I lost my daughter at a little bit, and right now losing my grandson in these grades. Something happens there. When you think about the strategies around 7th to 9th grade, one of the strategies is having clear and very inviting and organized classrooms. And I think that because there's multiple conversations happening, police in school versus not, emergency response plans versus not, middle school strategies that help our students do this, it's kind of hard to navigate the conversation in a clean way. But I think that when it comes to middle schools, etc., we want to provide more resources here because students are like coming into their own, their personalities have developed, etc. And the one thing that I heard is culturally responsive pedagogy, I think is incredibly important. Many of our parents, including myself, did not have the greatest times in schools, right? I'm not only a client, I'm the client president when it comes to the school to prison pipeline. And we're interrupting patterns of behavior. The code of conduct should address the visitor piece that Commissioner Elliott was really talking about. It should address it. And I'm not sure if those kinds of protocols are being followed because they are in the code of conduct. And we should like find out, are they being followed? Are parents not being responded to? Are parents being thought of in a negative way, the same way that we just saw what happened in I think, which was awful to find out as a parent that somebody wanted to say that, 90% of these parents are bad. We're not bad. We want the best for our children. And I think that partnership and transparency really helps with that. So I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the fact that the code of conduct and the fidelity and intent of what the community went through to put that in place, because we do know that the school to prison pipeline is real. There's plenty of proven data around that, but there is not plenty of proven data that the police actually lower the threats of violence and can actually increase it. As we saw at Liberty Pole, when the police were put into Liberty Pole, I think one of the commissioners was talking to me about this. Actually, the violence rose at Liberty Pole rather than decrease. So we got to really look at data well. In terms of, I thought it was fascinating that in terms of the highest, in terms of suspensions, is drug use and drug possession. And, I wonder, you got a 12-year-old who's addicted to opium, and what do? Do you put that kid out of school to be back on the streets with the problems that they have? Or do you use an intervention in order to try and get that student in the right track and really have that trigger additional resources, counselors, support, whatever it is that is needed in order to get that person in the right way? I mean, at the end of the day, it seems difficult to have a conversation when people are leading from a place of fear because of what is happening. And I honestly do not believe that any commissioner should be leading from a place of fear. We see that in middle school and in every school, if a teacher leads from a place of fear from our students, they don't manage a classroom well. Our kids are not, as some very bad people have said, animals and so on and so forth. They're not that. They are students, they are our children, and we can't lead from a place of fear, point blank. I'm sorry if I took up a little time. You guys brought up a lot, and there's just so many different conversations. I try to hit it all.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation and appreciate the fact that, this work. And so thank you so very much. I'm going to ask Callie if there are any other hands that are raised.
Yes, we actually do have some hands raised, but I do want to shout out our students who are in the room. And I do want to ensure that our students get an opportunity to speak and join this conversation. So I am tracking our attendees list. Students, if you're on, please, we really want for you to be able to join this conversation and provide your insights on what's happening. Do you feel safe in schools? What resources are available to you? Do you have any suggestions for how we can improve safety in the schools? So if you will have any talking points on that, please also raise your hand. But I do see that we have teacher Leslie Johnson from School 5 who has her hand raised in the interim. But students, please join in. Go ahead, Ms. Leslie.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And looking at the data and listening to the gentleman speak, I wanted to know why sometimes sixth grade is lumped with K6, and then sometimes it's lumped, with 7, 8, and have the stakeholders looked at the importance of the transition from sixth grade to seventh grade. I hear you talking about from 8th grade to 9th grade, but it is a big transition from sixth grade to 7th grade, especially in our district that has traditionally always had K-6 buildings, and sixth grade is with one teacher all day long in a family setting. And then they go straight from there to 7th grade, and they're expected to move and handle things on their own. As a person, as a teacher who's grown up in this district and went to all K-6 schools, and then Frederick Douglass for 7, 8, and then Edison, I know that it was a big transition for me coming from 6th grade going to 7th grade. And if you look at those 7th grade numbers, as far as the suspensions and everything, the 6th grade is much lower. I can tell you, as a teacher, I have taught in 2 models. I taught at Wilson Foundation when they tried to put 6th grade in there in the beginning, and it was 6, 8. And right now I'm in 5, which is a K-8 building. And I can tell you that the 6th grades are better in the fact that, they're not in as much trouble as the 7th and 8th graders are, but they look to the 7th and 8th graders as role models. And some of their bad behaviors are coming from them seeing what those 7th and 8th graders are doing on the other side of the building, that they can't wait to be like them next year. So I would, I've heard, people saying, the 6th graders need 6, 7, 8 need to all be together and they need to be out the building. But I kind of disagree. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I think the 6th grade do need to stay in the elementary school. They are better behaved, and when the 7th and 8th graders leave, you will even see their numbers drop even more.
That was a great question, Ms. Leslie. And first and foremost, thank you for your service, and everything you do on behalf of our students each and every day. The rationale or the original thought process was to go right with board policy and the way that our configurations should look, which would be the pre-K 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. But I will say that your point that you just provided there is well taken, and it's possibly something that we all and our board and the different stakeholders in our community should possibly consider. I too was a principal in an elementary building, and I can definitely understand and recognize those sentiments. And I believe our other principals on this call possibly also feel the same way. But I'm just speaking from an organizational point when the PowerPoint was being created by the school chiefs. But thank you for your thoughts. Great points.
And just to build a little bit off Chief Strickland, I would also say that our schools that are solely 7, 8 right now are doing very similar things with the transitions of 8 go 9 to 6 go 7. They're looking for those opportunities to bring kids in and do orientations and do connections to the school's community. So as much as we're talking about 8 go 9, right now, our schools that are 7, 8, and I'm looking at on my screen in the lower, I see Principal Harris, right? I see Principal Moore, I see that have these 7, 8 buildings. They're looking to build those opportunities for kids that transition from 6 to 7 as well.
Okay, thank you.
I see that we have Principal Burrows from Northeast over with her hand up. Go ahead.
Good evening. I just had a request or a suggestion. So as we are looking at the data that was presented, my request would be that when we're talking about the suspensions by grade level, that we actually disaggregate that data by cohort. Because the way our system pulls data, it will track an 18-year-old with 2 credits that is supposed to be a senior with true 9th graders. And if we are talking about solutions and solutions that are effective for our students, we need to know that that 18-year-old with 2 credits, a solution for that student would be a lot different from a true 9th grader that is struggling because they're coming from middle school and they're still learning to cope. And, you know, they're just dealing with day-to-day transition issues. It's just a difference in what our solution would be. So I would suggest that we disaggregate that data a little more, because you might see that a lot of those incidents at 9th grade are not even true 9th graders. And if they are true 9th graders, it may be a typical fight, but with an older student, you may see more of aggressive acts with weapons or, you know, things that are a lot more significant. So I think that's important. And I also think, you know, as we're talking about the suspensions, and it appears that the suspensions are lower since 2018. I know for our school, we have a help zone. Our help zone numbers are triple right now than what they were in 2018. So while our suspension numbers may be lower, we have over 5,000 incidents this year where students have been in the help zone because they needed a mediation, they needed a conference. Our agency staff members had to push into the conference room to have restorative conversations with students. So it doesn't look like a suspension, but they're interventions that we're putting into place every single day for several hours out of the day. So it looks like the numbers are lower, but there's just a lot more restorative conversations that are happening all day long. And so it's just pulling a lot of resources, but I think it's important to just mention that piece, because suspensions don't always speak to the big picture of the number of incidents that are happening throughout the day that are tapping into resources and exhausting resources. So I just wanted to mention that piece.
Thank you. President Elliott, we have one student raised with his hand, Isaiah Santiago. Go ahead, Isaiah, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be on here. I just saw Ms. Burrows. What's up, Ms. Burrows? She was my 9th grade principal. But I just wanted to kind of speak about, you know, that this is an issue. Violence altogether is an issue that we see in the safety of our school. And there's a lot of things that we have to contribute to this issue to solve it. And I think that a part of the answer is to figure out ways that we can, you know, add mentorship into our equation to come up with this answer of the solution. A lot of times when you see these students who are getting into those fights and you see these parents who are coming, it's simply because they don't have somebody who is strictly there and somebody who is constantly there to mentor them and bring them down the right path. So as we move forward, if we can move forward with an innovative mindset of figuring out how do we get more mentorship to our young people. I was going to speak about social and emotional learning, but I saw the superintendent already have a plan on that, and I'm 100% supportive in that. But we have to figure out a way to make sure that our young people can have a mentor who can help them go down the right path, even when that parent isn't there for them, because we see a lot of students who don't have that active parent who's leading them down the right way. So as we move forward, if we can move forward with an innovative mindset to figure out how do we give more mentors to our young people, and also how do we put more funding into places like Pathways to Peace, who does bring those mentors in, and who does come in to kind of deal with the conflict. So figuring out as we move forward, you know, to our board members, you know, as we move forward, if we can move forward with an innovative mindset to really benefit our young people, including myself, as we move forward into our school district and to solving this conflict that we have in our school district.
Thank you, Isaiah.
Okay, next on the list to speak, I have Mr. Saunders. Mr. Saunders, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, Nakia. Wonderful to see you. Let me first start off by saying, after working at the school number 8 for the last 6 years before my current position, I had an opportunity to see a lot of the issues that we're discussing up close and personal. One thing I recognized before we even came back into the building after the pandemic let us come back in was the fact that being concerned about curriculum at that time was not what was going to get us where we needed to go in the way of assisting our students. Trying to do trauma-informed work while students were in Zoom was an impossibility. I understood that the fact that we needed to do more social emotional learning and in preparation for getting our kids prepared to be around classmates, prepared to follow direction from adults once again, and all those different things need to take place before we rush back into the building. But I understood why we had to go back in. Being the supervisor over the Pathways of Peace programs, supervising arm currently, I want to increase the training of our staff that comes into the buildings. I want to increase their ability to pay attention and notice the different traumas that might have affected students that would lead to their inability to handle conflict and being able to handle disputes violently. I agree wholeheartedly with Isaiah. I believe that utilizing intergenerational mentorship within the restorative practices is mandatory. I think addressing the social emotional health of our students is going to be key to us turning a corner as it relates to the violence that we see. The violence itself and having had to work within that realm for so many years, I recognize that not having law enforcement in the buildings is, like they say, it doesn't show that it's going to decrease any violence whatsoever. But with that, the school safety officers that are currently in the building, I think would be helpful if they had a team lead that weekly meetings regarding ongoing community disputes with the likelihood of school violence be discussed. I think that communication from the outside in would also help from agencies that assist with keeping the school climate down. I don't want to, I heard someone say earlier that they're criminalizing young people by calling them gang members. Well, if a gang member if someone calls himself a gang member, I'm gonna let him ride with that. Your gang membership or your affiliation, whatever that is adding to the different anxieties that a lot of these young people feel upon dealing with individuals in their peer group. And it's adding to some of the issues that we're seeing arising in our buildings. We had to have a high level of communication among our students and counselors in a way that our students are comfortable enough to talk to us about the multimedia threats and ongoing online beefs that need to be addressed before students even make it to the school building. We need to be able to go to the homes and address those issues with parents before the young person is put on a bus, and then all the resources within the school are drained in being able to try and deal with those violent situations as they arise within the building. Then we have parents that are coming to the building for any particular reason to support their young people, and violence is an issue. I believe myself that there have to be graduated sanctions as it relates to these violent or threatening behaviors from parents. The same way that we as professionals working with young people are held to a higher account as far as behavior goes, parents have to be held to a higher accountability as it relates to violence on campus rather than in the community. We have to also recognize the fact that with what some of our students go through daily and how they try to bounce back after COVID, with so many of them being stuck in homes with their abusers, stuck in their homes with their neglectors, getting to the school building sometimes re-traumatizes a young person before they even get into the door. Where we worked at school number 8, not only did we see the regular memorials for homicide victims, but now we have to see the life-size cutouts of loved ones of students who are going into those buildings, and they're not going in prepared to learn at that point because they're reliving one of the worst times of their lives. So as we embark to try and put an end to or decrease the number of violent acts that we see on our campuses, I think how we address the preventative measures that can go in place before a violent altercation occurs definitely has to be tied closer to the community in the way of restorative practices, intergenerational mentorship, and understanding that we have to work with these kids outside the building more so, and have them prepared to walk into that building with learning on their mind.
Thank you, Victor. Kalia?
Yes, next we have Mr. Anthony Jordan, who is joining the conversation. I just want to also throw out to all the rest of the students who are on, please feel free to jump in. If you raise your hand, or even if you have a question and you're shy, you can put it in the chat and someone will voice it for you. So I'm joining the conversation, but Mr. Jordan?
Good evening, everybody. And I'll repeat that. I know the students had a great opportunity to talk to President Elliott, and if you remember President Elliott, they had a lot of great things to say about the situation in their schools dealing with violence and the mental health issues and other, conversational pieces that we talked about. So students, please, 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 please speak up, because everybody here is for you. They're here to hear from you. So the thing I just want to mention to, as we look at the data and look at the work, one of the great things I do for the district is work on the MBK initiative. And one of the things we've learned nationally, statewide, and even here locally, is that boys and young men of color have the highest incidence and mostly negative outcomes in school districts here and across the country. So I just hope as we look at this work, we look at those lessons and really put a focus on our boys and young men of color who, if we address that demographic, we have a chance to uplift our whole district. And I would just double and triple down with the gentleman and Isaiah who spoke before me, Victor and Isaiah. The mentoring is very important, and MBK has a high emphasis on that. And the other thing that I would mention is that community engagement. We have some great community people. So as we continue to do this work, involving them in that mentoring and those other programs that may have a unique opportunity to reach students. And once again, particularly our boys and young men of color.
I see a student who has raised his hand, so I'm gonna skip the line for students. I have a David Bouillon. David, feel free to jump in.
So my name is David Bouillon. I'm a 10th grader at Rochester College. And I just want to say that I think this pandemic, or like just the circumstances in general, really showed and tested the district's infrastructure and how lacking it is. And I think that when we talk about, pulling away from charter schools and having more students come to RCSD, I think we should put a pause to that, because obviously we aren't ready. We are missing so many school counselors and so many school personnel. And I think that it's like, how do we figure out a way to close those gaps to make sure that our students are really mentally engaged and mentally prepared? And I think that when we talk about mentorship, I think that's really important, because a lot of these students who are engaging in violent, or not violence, but, getting suspended and stuff, they look up to older students. And it's like, okay, if they're looking to older students, how can we make sure that our older students are also supporting our younger students? And that if we aren't engaged, if we don't have enough counselors or therapists in our school, how can we have our students engaged in a community where they are supported? Because obviously we know that when students are engaged in something, whether it be an extracurricular or anything in the community, that they turn to other things to be engaged in, and that includes violence, drugs, or other things. So I think one of the solutions is how can we engage our students to be part of something bigger than themselves, and I think other students are key to that. So
Thanks, David. Going to move to Mr. Rodney Moore, principal over at Northeast.
Northwest.
Northwest, I'm
Right.
sorry.
No
I'm
problem.
reading and doing it at the same time. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. A lot of the discussion today was kind of centered around middle school. And I have been in middle school for, I guess, 25 of the 27 years that I've been in education, counting K-8 as well. And I think sometimes we miss a huge opportunity. And a lot of the discussion today deals around violence. And one way to really quell that is to make school more inviting for students than things that are out there on the streets for them. I mean, we really need to take a look at programmatic changes, what we're doing with curriculum in the middle schools. I mean, middle school itself was really developed around that ability to make those exploratory or create those exploratory experiences for kids. And so when I look at what, you know, I have done with turnaround and things of that sort, a lot of it had to deal with exposing students to what was out there. Because if we ask students, and I use this analogy all the time, you know, I'll ask a student, you know, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, very general. And they'll say something like, you know, I want to be a mechanical engineer, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. And if you were to ask a student, well, what does that mean? You know, what does that actually mean? And how do you get there? Many students can't tell you because they don't know exactly what that looks like. They've heard it, but it's up to us to really expose them to it. We need to be able to bring mechanical engineers or graphic artists or all these things into the schools. We need to take our kids out to these places where people are working, these kind of external experiences, because if kids don't know what that final goal truly looks like, they can't create a ladder to get there. So I'm really about programmatic changes, you know, and I'm a huge fan of STEM, STEAM, whichever you want to look at. And when I was at school 3, we really started focusing on STEM. And we saw that we had a huge decrease in discipline, suspensions, but we also saw our academics just like start to rise sky high. And again, I know that there are things that students have to do. I always call them the mandatory electives, but we really need to be more innovative. And I think our student was talking about being more innovative in schools. And that's going to have to be what the solution is, because I want to make school more pleasing for a student than not being in school. You know, when I come to school, middle school really is about, you know, fun, addressing the social emotional aspects, exposing kids to what they're going to be, because I have felt that when a student leaves 8th grade, they have pretty much gained who they are going to be, you know, their work ethic, you know, their interest. And so why can't I expose students to all of these different things and then help them create that pathway? So now that they're in high school, they can take more directed coursework or further explore things so that there is that preparation. And so we can't forget about curriculum and instruction when we're having this discussion about violence, because if we improve that, I think that would have a positive impact.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. I have Principal Hepburn over at school number 2. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the organizers that put this together, from the superintendent to the board president, and then also Renee Turner, who reached out. So, you know, one of the things that I heard while I've been on this, which is so connected to what our district is focused on, is the language that we use as we discuss our scholars, our teachers, and our leaders in the district, which is extremely important. And then we talk about things that have occurred currently, and how we want to be sure to avoid to impose that thinking to the families that it doesn't completely connect to. So I come from the Rochester community. You know, I'm here, I live, and I grew here. I don't feel fearful at all in the building where I serve. And I think a lot of our leaders share that same sentiment. And then there's also our teachers, staff, parents, and families that connect to that, you know, thinking. And you know, Principal Burrows talked about the resources and how they're drained and how that's connected to the challenges we face daily. And then, you know, Isaiah talked about mentorship, and then others touched on that, from, you know, Mr. Saunders to the other leaders in our district. And, you know, I want to speak to some of it, and I also want to ask a couple of questions and then offer some solutions, right? So, you know, how do we increase mentorship? One of the things that I've seen be successful in the work that we do in the community, and then also that we do in the school daily, is we use the people we have. So we realize that systems are already in place that create challenges to getting the right people in our schools. And that's, of course, a hiring process where there are certain requirements. You know, when we look at the city overall, there was civil service. And then when we look at our district, there are certain certifications. Ultimately, every day, I look to empower the team members we already have, and sometimes my best social worker. And I know that Mr. Bouillon, one of our students, talked about the limited amount of social workers and counselors. Some of the best counselors and social workers I have work in the cafeteria. They get paid $15 an hour, but they are the ones that proactively address issues that we use to prevent what we have identified as violence or undesired behaviors during our conversation today. So, you know, I just want to just celebrate how we've been grounded and being solution focused. You know, we know the challenges, and Rochester, as it's an amazing district and city that we live in, even with those challenges, we have amazing people, and that is really spoken to by the participants we have today. So how do we get, you know, parents like Alicia to be in our buildings, to provide the services that we need to ultimately address the challenges we face, because every challenge has opportunity, right? So another question that I have is, like, how do we become more innovative? That innovation, again, connects to how we establish relationships, and this is just a proposed solution. How do we build relationships? I think someone mentioned earlier that, you know, police officers don't prevent violence. They respond to it. That's a proactive approach. That's not a proactive approach. That's a responsive approach to an undesired behavior. When police are called, they're coming to address an issue that already occurred. However, there's probably a cafeteria worker that saw it about to happen. They saw it on social media. They saw it in the cafeteria, and they had hopefully conversation with someone that said, you know, I need to talk to this person, or we need to talk to this scholar to ensure that it doesn't escalate. So one of the solutions to being more innovative is empowering the people we already have. It doesn't cost more money. It's just our leaders looking at the skill set that we have in our building and utilizing it in a way outside of certification area. And that does not say that, you know, people are not experts in their field. I celebrate it. I'm a candidate in the doctoral program. Education is important. However, you know, there are people that can be most appropriate in responding to or proactively addressing issues that may arise that has not spent a day in college, but their experience and their life approach will resolve it before it even gets to the principal's office. So just looking at ways to how we use the people we already have to address the issues that we see proactively outside of certification, license, or testing criteria. So I invite, you know, our district to continue to explore those opportunities so that we can avoid what, you know, some call violence, but I just really consider undesired behaviors, and that we can be ahead of it as opposed to behind it in addressing issues. And that's where you see suspensions. And the last thing I would say is it's great to have data. And I think Principal Burrows spoke to it some, but data driven versus data informed is where we want to be data informed. And we want to take the information connected to the data to be proactive in addressing and responding to issues before we even get to suspension. So what did we do before that? You know, what was our active supervision before that? And those are the conversations I have with our team members when, you know, we have to deal with an issue that's undesired. So I just invite, you know, this great thinking committee to explore what we already have, because I think research says and data says that pouring funds into a problem is not going to resolve it. So that's just what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Principal Halpern.
Thank you, President Elliott. I'm seeing two other hands. I'm just gonna again put my call out for students and also for parents who have not yet spoken. But we do have quite a few in the Zoom room. So for parents who want to also provide their input, I'm going to call on Ms. Lisa McClary, who is a social worker. I'm working with Pathways to Peace in the schools.
Well, can you guys hear me? I do need to correct. I do not work with Pathways to Peace. I am not affiliated with them, but I do work with them. But I'm not, I work in the city school district. And I've been with the district for about 16 years. I do want to say I've heard a lot of good things. A lot of people are like really hitting on some really key notes of mental health mental illness. And I don't think that we realize a lot of our kids came back to school with anxiety and depression and anger. And boys show depression in different ways than girls. They tend to be more aggressive because they don't understand. It's not easy to tell someone that you're depressed because then it makes you look weak. I think we do a lot of assuming of what our kids are going through, a lot of assuming of what our kids need without really asking them. A lot of things I find in the district are way too adult driven. And so we have to get back to figuring out what is it that we can do for them. We have a lot of parents that are home depressed. I work with a lot of them. A lot of them did not have Medicaid, did not have food stamps, did not have mental health themselves, and they're suffering in silence. And so I think we definitely need to extend whatever services that we have to our parents because they are really, really struggling. And I do want to commend you guys for not allowing police officers back into our buildings. That right there has been tragic. I have never saw or found a very good interaction between police officers and our students. Matter of fact, it really, they went through more trauma. A lot of them were cited and had to show up to court. I had a young man that was living in a homeless shelter with his girlfriend, lost his baby, came to school that summer, wanted to be there. Myself and another colleague made sure that he got there. He couldn't finish out the day before he was triggered. The police came, and this young man was really one credit away from graduating. And that was the police officer, and that was the administrators. It was absolutely just horrible. And so for me to see that as a social worker was not only traumatic for them, but for myself as well. You know, because it's like, okay, so you're going about it the wrong way. And a lot of social workers, we're overlooked. You know, people say, well, social workers in the building, counselors, they don't come to us. They don't utilize us in the way that they're supposed to. And many of our counselors, God bless them, I love them, but a lot of them are academic driven. So when you're saying getting SEL support, you're really talking about social workers because many of the counselors, only a handful of them will deliver that service. Most of them just want to deal with academics. And so, yeah, we're overwhelmed because everybody comes and looks to us, but we're not really working in our full capacity. Our whole group is weak. You know, you have some that specialize in this or some that may do this, some that go to homes, but everybody is not doing the same thing to get the best result. So I just want, you know, people to understand, let's kind of look at this in a more realistic way and figure out the why. And a lot of this violence, we say, oh, it's gangs or it's this. I speak to students on the street or in the school, and I ask them, what is the key? What is going on with the violence? And the answer is very seldom gangs. And you would be surprised, even the 20-something-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, I ask them, when I work summer school, I always ask students on the street, what is the reason why, you know, you guys are murdering each other or hurting each other? And you know what they tell me? Relationships. Girls, boys. And it's like, nobody knows that. Everybody is assuming that it's always gang related, and it's not. A lot of these young people do not know how to handle their emotions or how to engage in healthy relationships. And so when they feel violated, that's the first thing that they go to. And so I just kind of sort of want to, you know, give out, you know, some other things to kind of sort of, you know, think about. We don't have to get so fancy. You know, we can kind of sort of just do that grassroots thing of building relationships, because the more that we, you know, add all these fancy words and do all these, you know, procedures and have this in place, the more we get away from those connections. It's really more simple than we're making it. And that is just plain downright caring, reaching out. What can I do? How can I help you? Let's get it done.
Thank you. We're going to have Nicole, Commissioner Joe Jackson to speak. This is a great conversation, and we've actually gone over time, but it looks like we may need a part two. But Callie, I'm going to have you to call the people whose hands are raised, please. Kalia?
Sorry about that. I was muted and talking. I'm going to call the folks in the order of which I've received them. And again, I just want to remind everyone who received the email that you are always able to send your comments if you're not able to speak at this session. There's an email that was provided for you to provide any additional comments to the session, or you may also send them to individual board members if you'd like as well. But if you have a burning thing to say and you haven't made it into the conversation as we wrap up, definitely please make use of that. I see quite a few hands now. So Nicole Granderson.
Hi, it's actually Cherie. That's my Facebook name. I forgot to change it.
Okay, can you, I know that we had asked everyone if they could just change their name. Can you please say your name again and where you're from?
Cherie Grandison, and I'm from Rochester, New York.
Okay, what are you representing? Parents, students, staff?
Parents.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grandison. Go ahead.
Well, I have two scholars. My son Byron attends leadership, and my daughter Sierra attends 39 school. And they both, my oldest is 13, and he about to transition to go to high school next year. And before that, he started going to leadership. He was making good grades, and then the bullying had started. I went out, bought new clothes, phones, whatever he wanted. He came home, I think the next day, somebody pushed him in the mud. He was upset. He didn't want to go to school no more. So me, my mom, his godparents decided not to send him to school for, a couple of days. So, it's a minute, calm down and stuff like that. So when it happened, it was a lot of confusion. But when I talked to the social worker and the other person, I'm not gonna mention the name, they said my son really don't start drama at the school. It's other boys be picking on him. Same thing as my daughter. She's in 3rd grade, she come home, she crying. We asked what happened. She said, Mom, look, hit me. She told the teacher do nothing. So she walked out the classroom. I get the calls. And I'm not a fan of bullying. I don't approve it. I was bullied when I was younger. And I just don't like it at all. I don't like the violence that's going on in the schools, the fighting. I remember one incident, I went to my son's school and a fight broke out. And I was the shock. I can't talk to nobody kids because they're not my kids. So when the fight broke out, I immediately called my son, said, you okay? He was like, yeah, Mom, I'm in the lunchroom. And the fight happened right in front of me while I was talking to a teacher. And I'm like, something has to change. Something has to be done about this fighting, this bullying. It's not just in middle school, it's in elementary school, it's in high school, it's on the school buses, it's on the RTS buses, it's when the kids go out to play, it's when the kids be at the bus stop, it's every day, all day. I have nieces and nephews who attend 33 school. They come home, my niece mad because a girl threatened her or bullied her, pull her hair, and it's nonstop. And these are, good kids. We don't raise our kids to go fight nobody other kids. We don't raise them like that. So when they come home and tell us, we call the schools and we try to, see what's going on and everything else. And it still goes on and on and on and on. And something has to be done about it. My nephew, he 5, kindergarten. A little boy pushed him for no reason at all. I'm just not speaking about my kids. I speak about all of them because I look at my nieces and nephews as my kids too. I'm speaking about the whole thing from my nephew up to my son. And you see it constantly every day when they come home. They're crying. They don't want to go back to school. They don't want to do their homework. It's every single day and something has to be done.
Thank you, Cherie. We appreciate your comments. I'm gonna call for any additional parents to also jump in because I know you were the first parent to speak. So additional parents, before we close out, please feel free and I'll take a look on the list and have you bumped up. But I have Commissioner Adams.
I'll make this really quick. I just wanted to give a special shout out to Corey, Leslie, and Nakia and Isaiah. But I also want to uplift what Rodney Moore said, because what he did is mirrored something my daughter had told me in reference to curriculum, the programmatic changes. The district has some in a catalog, they have some stuff on the shelf that is very interesting to students. But because of lack of enough participation in one particular school, she doesn't have access to it. There might be 2 students from East, 3 students from Monroe. I believe COVID taught us how to bring everybody together, man, via Zoom. And I don't have the technology personally to do it, but I believe us as a district, we can make this happen so that the students my daughters, and the rest of the students can find some pleasure and embrace school, have fun again. And that's all I got. Thanks, Rodney.
Thanks, Commissioner Adams. Mr. Joe Jackson.
All right, good evening, everyone. First off, I want to say thanks for having me on this meeting. Number one, Pathways of Peace was a big part of our Edison campus. They gave us a lot of knowledge to what was going on in the streets right now with some of our students that's in certain situations. And by them not being here has really hurt us a lot. I try to build relationships with a lot of our students that's struggling, and I take pride in that. And also, I'm a big supporter of bringing the police back into the school. The police officers that we had here at Edison really built a lot of good relationships with a lot of our students. We didn't have a lot of arrests. It was more preventive than aggressive and being reactive to bad situations. But just having them here, the previous years to now, I see a very big difference, because when parents come in, when their children have had situations at the school, whether it was an altercation or a disagreement with the administrator or whatever, a lot of parents come up here with a lot of disrespect. And it's not a safe environment to work in. I've been here at the Edison complex for 20 years, and I've never seen it where so many parents come in and just off the bat, how you doing, ma'am? Good morning. And just the disrespect right away. The police officers really help. when I knew a parent was coming in irate, I would call them up here so they're already here. I get a total different reaction when they're here to when they're not. So I'm a big supporter of bringing the police officers back. And also, I just wanted to touch on, are we really looking at, as a district, at some of these students that are overaged and undercredited to get them into a situation where they can be successful besides coming into a school of this size and basically not doing nothing, just, you know, being in here, being disruptive and just wreaking havoc in our buildings. So that's all I had to say. But like I said, I'm a big supporter of the police coming back. They played a big role in here, from Thanksgiving Day baskets, Christmas baskets, delivering them to the families. They were a big supporter in our Edison community. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson is an SSO over at Edison, for folks to understand. We have next Derek Blue. Mr. Blue is also an SSO. Mr. Blue, say what school you're serving at?
Hi, yes, I work at World of Inquiry, 58 school. I'm a K through 12 building, so I have it all. I have from the kindergartens to 12th grade. We play, you know, the school culture has changed from years where it was 58 culture. I think it's a big problem with when you speak, so we talk about the 7th and 8th grade. I think it's more than 7th and 8th grade. I want to go back and say it's from, some of these kids are from 6th grade to 12th grade. Because we got to think about it. We was in COVID for almost 2 years. These kids didn't come to school. So our 7th graders are really 5th graders, you know, and our 9th graders are really 7th graders who have not been around each other in the school. And, you know, wherever environment they was in, they brought it into school, and we had to try to get them back to learning how to, you know, the rules and all this other stuff that goes with school. We have so many incidents of, you know, kids is just telling us, you know, SMD, parents coming up there, mad kids calling the parents on the phones, parents coming up there with their siblings and calling their cousins, and everybody come up there. And it's like, this year right here has been one of the worst years I have. And I've been at World of Inquiry for about 11 years. And I honestly say, but speaking with my co-worker, Joe Jackson, I agree. I am for SSOs, SROs coming back into school. We had Officer Santana, who was amazing. He never arrested anybody. He was more going into classrooms, educating the kids on laws and what's going on. And he would talk to the parents, and the parents will come into the school just to talk to him. He didn't put nobody, you know, he really wasn't a person that handcuffed kids and just throw kids in a car and call for help and all of that. He was more like a teacher in the building. And you know, like I said, with the parents and the disrespect of the parents coming in the building, it just really had got out of control this year. And I just, you know, like I said, I'm more for SROs coming back in the building. And we do have counselors in the building, and we do use the counselors. The kids, first thing they see is us in the morning. The last thing they see when they leave is us. Kids do come and talk to us and tell us everything. I have kids talk to me about stuff that they don't even talk to their parents with. And whatever we talk about, it's between us. You know, I do go to the kids' house. I do check on some of these kids. And the team that we got is we got each other's back at 58 school. You know, it's not about always kicking a kid out. You know, we do restorative practice. We do mediations. Some days I can't even do what I'm supposed to do because I'm in a mediation with 5 or 6 girls at one time, you know, and so it takes up a lot. So, you know, like I said, I had to step back and think about the pandemic and how these kids was affected, where they was living, and what took place when they was out of school for almost 2 years. So thanks for having me. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. There were some other hands up, but I did see that they have been dropped. So President Elliott, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
I do see Principal Scott's hand raised, Kalia.
I think he was just applauding.
Oh,
That's a clap hands.
That's,
But
that's actually a raise for me, actually.
oh, okay.
I have to be totally honest, and I'll just step out and I have to say, Joe Jackson, who's our lead at Edison, has been here for years, and he's provided nothing but support for our building. And I mean, he doesn't have a certification in social work or counseling, but I'll tell you, anyone that is here will certainly go to Joe Jackson, probably before many of the other certified individuals. And I say that because we talk about relationships, and a little bit of me is a little bit scared to really say what I want to say, because then I know I become almost demonized, because at Edison we are a huge building, and I understand the scope around police officers, and I can't go back. I go back and forth about having them in the building or not, but I do know that we had a really good relationship with the officers that were here at Edison. That's what I speak to, because that was the culture that we built. As the principal, we had a very clear, this is what is going to happen if something occurs, and that's what took place. So our officers really were behind closed doors unless they were going into classrooms or helping out, as Joe Jackson said. And so I think we really need to make sure that we are, thinking about this, because, I put in the chat, we are we're a place of education. We're supposed to educate our students. We're supposed to give them experiences. And I feel as though we are, if anything happens, if any change could happen, it's going to happen here at the school building, where we can try to build the relationship, because I'll be honest, we need more Black and brown police officers anyways, especially in our community here in Rochester. How better to do that with having individuals, maybe not in the building all the time, but being able to kind of come in. And I'll be honest and tell you that relationship has been broken, because unfortunately, not every week, but every other week, I have students who are shot at, robbed. I'm getting things from my chief every Sunday saying what occurred on the weekend with my students, and I don't have any intel, none, zero. The intel comes from students. And before we took the SROs out and we kind of broke that relationship, I would be able on Mondays coming in and saying, Joe, let's pull these individuals in. Let's see what's going on, because violence is happening in the community. We need to make sure that we are still building relationships with our community people, because the violence is not starting in the schools. The violence, unfortunately, is starting in the community. People are getting shot. People are getting killed. We can't afford not to get along with individuals who are actually supposed to be helping us. And if they're not, we need to call them to the carpet and we need to hold them accountable. But for the ones that are, we need to support them, because I'll tell you right now, we call the police. I mean, we have individuals, we have a large population here at our school that are on medication. A large amount of students that have seizures, a large amount of students who have ills. And sometimes we call the police and it takes them a little bit of a minute now to get here, because you know why? The relationship has been broken, unfortunately. And I'm not blaming anyone. And I certainly don't, want to be looked at as, okay, oh, Edison needs SROs. Oh, Edison is the dangerous spot. No, that's not it. Because we've been operating without SROs. But I'll tell you, it's because of dedicated individuals like the Joe Jacksons, like the Derek Blues, those individuals who are constantly every day trying to do their best. And let's be honest, students are being disrespectful, parents are being disrespectful. Heck, teachers And adults and administrators are being disrespectful because everybody is on edge right now, period. And guess what? We keep on talking about this word love, but we're not spreading this love across the board. And trust me, I know not everyone is for our kids. Trust me, I'm from the district. I live here. You know, I'm not scared. This is what I do, but I also have to be mindful of what's real as well. And if we're talking about love and providing grace and mercy and things of that nature, I think we really don't need to just discount all of the resources that we have in this community, especially when people give their life on the line to do what is best.
All right, thank you. I think that's the last hand. I'm going to, let me just thank everyone for participating in this rich, thought-provoking, real conversation on this issue. What I gather from all of this, and we had 3 questions: how safe do you feel in schools? What known supports are available to you? What suggestions do you have that will make your schools feel safe? But what came across was that we need to have relationships with our students and with our families and in our school community. And we need to offer the kind of exciting programming that would help to mitigate a lot of these issues. And you know, we heard, you know, those who are in favor, some of those who are in favor of the police returning, and those who feel that we can offer other kinds of alternatives to the police. And so this has been a rich conversation. We will determine what the next steps are going to be. And I want to just thank all of our stakeholders, our students, our parents, our community folks, our teachers. Want to thank our school chiefs, Chief Strickland and Carmine Peluso. Want to also, can't end this without thanking our board staff, Kalia, Francine, and Charisma. Want to thank Marisol Lopez and her team, Tom Morgan. And I want to also just thank everyone who was on social media, on Facebook and YouTube, who listened to this as well. And I'd like to, the superintendent has heard all of these comments, and I want the superintendent to just close out and just sort of from her perspective, summarize what she heard and how this can inform the work that the district is doing. Dr. Myers-Small.
Thank you, President Elliott. Coretta Scott King once said that the greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. For the past 2 hours, we have heard from students, parents, teachers, principals, administrators, safety and security, the community, and our Board of Education as it relates to their compassionate perspectives about how we can help keep our schools safe. I took note of the chat, and I've asked Kalia to save those notes because there's some great information there. And I did take notes, and I know that my team and my staff have taken notes. The bottom line, when you listen to what everyone has said, it boils down really to one single factor, and that's the R word, and that's relationships. It's being in relationship with our scholars, with their families, and with the community. And President Elliott has been very adamant and very persistent that we cannot do this alone, and that we have to do a better job of really working with our community partners to help uplift our district. And so I am extremely grateful for all that was shared today, and certainly we'll talk about this as a cabinet. I know that we'll talk about this between the administration and the board, and we'll continue to move forward, because this is an area that we cannot continue to just admire that there are issues or problems. We really have to take that next step and figure out how to address and to eliminate or significantly lessen what the issues are. So thank you I just join in chorus with President Elliott to thank you for coming out tonight and participating. I know that this is one of many conversations, but again, the goal is to move forward and to put these things into action. So thank you, President Elliott.
I was remiss, totally remiss in not thanking Renee Turner, who really helped us with this program. And she did yesterday a session on Each One Reach One that spoke about violence. And she talked to me about the students who also participated in that one yesterday. So I want to thank those students as well. And I'm looking forward to having conversations with those students and getting some of their input as well. And Madam President, Madam Superintendent, you may want to mention the violence, the wearing of orange tomorrow. I don't know what it's called, but talk a little bit about that effort as well that's going on tomorrow.
Sure. About 6 or 7 years ago, a young lady participated in the second inauguration of former President Barack Obama, and her life was tragically taken. And so violence campaign was initiated that it's designated that we wear orange, and that day is tomorrow, June 3rd. And it's to signify that individually and collectively as a community, that we are tired of being tired, and that we work together to ensure that violence does not harm our children and that violence has no place in our community. I do want to thank Mayor Malik Evans last week for taping a video segment with me that we did in partnership between the City School District and the City of Rochester. But we will be tweeting tomorrow, and we encourage you not only to tweet, but to wear orange in your solidarity of stopping the violence in our community. Thank you,
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. So I just want to thank everybody again for participating in this. And, you know, we're looking forward to continued conversations around this. I'll be working with the superintendent and her staff to operationalize what we've seen and get back to the community about some of the steps that we are looking at doing for our school community. So thank you so very much and have a great evening. Good night.
True heart for the children in our district. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.